Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Overcoming Chronic Illness podcast. My name is Dr. Brian Rade, and I'm a naturopathic doctor. And today I am joined by Maria Zilka. Maria is a nutrition therapist, and she works with one of my former podcast guests, Dr. Greg Nye. And she works, to my understanding, works extensively with the something called the Safe and Sound protocol. And I believe that's going to be the focus of our attention today. You never know where the chats might take us, but that's what I'm hoping to pick her brain about mostly today. I had heard about the Safe and Sound protocol years ago, had a few patients that had been using it with other clinicians. And then when I spoke to Dr. Nye several months ago, he mentioned that that was the main therapy that he refers for folks to help with their nervous system regulation needs. And so him and Maria have been working together for some time, to my understanding, and she is the clinician that he refers to work with the Safe and Sound protocol with folks. I'm sure that we'll get into the nuts and bolts of what the Safe and Sound protocol is and all of that. But just as a quick overview, the Safe and Sound protocol was developed by Dr. Stephen Porges and some other colleagues to help folks with nervous system regulation. Dr. Porges is renowned for his development of what is called polyvagal theory. And I'm sure we'll get into polyvagal theory and all that good stuff. But just for some context, that's what we're going to be talking about today. With the Safe and Sound protocol, after talking to Dr. Nye, I was inspired to look into how to become certified to offer the Safe and Sound protocol, and I wound up doing the certification program myself. So I've been offering the Safe and Sound protocol to my patients for several months now, and I am just interested in hearing about Maria's experience. I've been seeing some good results with my patients, and I just want to pick her brain and get a little more insight into how another colleague is using this in their practice. So that's what we're talking about today. So hopefully that's of interest. Just before jumping into the episode and bringing Maria into the chat, just want to invite you, if you're not already a subscriber to my newsletter mailing list, please feel free to subscribe. When you subscribe to the newsletter, you get free access to the first two modules of my Overcoming Chronic Illness course. There's the introductory module as well as the mitochondrial dysfunction module. So it kind of gives you an overview of what the course is all about and get into the weeds of mitochondrial dysfunction, very important topic for many folks dealing with complex chronic illness. And then the other modules talk about things like mold toxicity, Lyme and co-infections, mast cell activation syndrome, heavy metals, digestive disorders, a whole bunch of other things. So feel free to sign up for the mailing list if you like access to the course. And then also you'll be on my mailing list and can hear about the latest and greatest when I manage to send out a newsletter. I don't send out very often. It's usually maybe a few times a year. So you definitely will not be bombarded by messages from me. But if you'd like to stay in touch that way, please feel free to sign up either in the show notes if you're listening to this on a podcast platform, or in the video description if you are watching this on YouTube. So I will pause the recording and I will be joined again in a moment by Maria. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. I'm now joined by Maria. Maria, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to picking your brain about the SSP and other related things. Just before we jump into our chat, would you mind just giving folks a little bit of a background about who you are and what you do in practice, please?
Sure. So, my name is Maria Zilka, and I have been in clinical practice, for about 15 years. I started working with Dr. Greg Nye, very specifically nutritional programs for cancer treatment. And I was very intrigued by the stories that the patients would bring into the clinic. Almost every single patient has a trauma story or a chronic stress story that correlates to this progression of dysfunction in the body. So I started digging into that because I was recognizing that there was something foundationally missing to the work that I was doing, which was my job, my whole focus was helping people navigate diet interventions during, treatments. And I would get incremental results with people. It was very difficult because it was almost like it was symptom management almost. And so I was curious on more foundational efforts to help people. And I started noticing the link between the nervous system, dysregulation and gut function. And that became my entire focus. I really saw that that was the most beneficial way that I could be helping. So I did a bunch of research, I dug into it, and I found somebody that I really appreciate his work is Dr. Stephen Porges, who has over 45 years of research into this. And it's an interesting story because it was a progression of understanding, starting with, I mean, his focus was working with autism. So I started following his work, which led me to read a whole lot of other things and studies. And it really became very clear to me that a foundational piece for all health is in the autonomic nervous system, and specifically the functioning or the malfunctioning of the vagus nerve.
Um, then that seems like a perfect segue into maybe if you don't mind describing for folks like what is polyvagal theory, being kind of the parent theory that led to the SSP. So if you
Yeah.
wouldn't mind maybe describing what polyvagal theory is for folks if they're not familiar.
Yeah. So the vagus nerve, it's Vegas is it correlates to the word vagabond. It's the Latin word for wandering. It's the largest nerve in the body. It's the 10th cranial nerve. You have 12 cranial nerves, and it's the 10th cranial nerve, and the vagus nerve from the brainstem all the way down through the colon. It's innervating your entire organ system. It is connected to peripheral nervous system, and it's connected to very, very intricately to the enteric nervous system. And the enteric nervous system is basically your gut's nervous system. And it's a little bit of a new kid on the block. So it was just discovered, in the last 50 years that they discovered that the gut actually had its very own neuronally laced nervous system, which to me is fascinating. And the other neuronally laced system, or where we have specific neurons, is in the heart. And the vagus nerve it comes down through the brainstem, and it's innervating your heart. It innervates your larynx, for your how your voice sounds. And then it goes all the way through your digestive system, through your elimination system, and innervates how those organs function, right? So you can see then how spectacularly important this nerve is. If it is dysregulated, you have so many opportunities for dysfunction in the body. And the beauty of it is that we can re-regulate it. It's not pathogenic. It's nothing that you could say, oh, well, that's the way it is. That's the way I am. That's the way my body functions. You actually have full control over healing and re-regulating this nerve, which I find so wonderful because so many patients feel a little bit like helpless, like, oh, my body's doing what it's doing. But this is such a key entry point. And I'll go back to explaining the autonomic nervous system. It is, I'm sure a lot of people are aware of the terms sympathetic and parasympathetic. So we have our fight, flight, or freeze, and then we've got our rest and digest. And some people call it feed and breed because the parasympathetic is also tied to all the activities that we do when we're in a relaxed and happy state. Um, Reproductive being one of those things. So anyway, the this entire system is based on survival. And that's what's so fascinating about it. It's kind of a biologically evolutionary system that has adapted over, long period of time from more prehistoric stress events, like the predator chasing you, to more modern day stresses, which feel the same in the body. We still have that same kind of response, fight or flight or freeze. Or when we get out of that, oh my goodness, I'm sorry. If we
That's
can
okay.
recognize, I'm sorry, can
Oh, I can
you
pause for a sec. Yep. Just
so sorry.
All right.
I'm
For
sorry.
for folks listening, audio only here, just there was a dog that came on the scene, so hence hence the interruption. And it looks like the dog is still on the scene, so I'm just gonna pause here again for one more second. Oh no, okay. Looks like we're good now.
So sorry.
No problem. Okay, we're recording still, so if you want to pick up where you left off, please.
Okay. And you'll edit that out.
We just do one takes around here actually, but
Oh,
it
okay.
adds to the realism of all this. You know, we're real
Yeah, you
people,
know what I
Maria, you and
love?
I. Yep.
It truly is the realism, right? Like now all of a sudden the nervous system is going,
There you
and
go. Yep.
startled. And we'll just take our deep cleansing breath and
Perfect.
come back
Yeah.
to what we're talking about. It's
Wonderful.
actually perfect. The nervous system is designed for survival, the autonomic nervous system. So it's a very important term that Dr. Porges likes everybody to understand, which is called neuroception. And he, I believe, is the one who coined the term. So, neuroception is our unconscious scanning of our environment for threat, right? And so, if you have even a memory of threat, you could be triggered into a threat response by something in the environment that reminds you of that. So, very commonly, a great example, I had this woman that I was working with, lovely woman, and she was really in the freeze mode. She just couldn't get out of being stuck. And so we were talking a little bit in my office, and she said that she'd had that her cat died, and she was very traumatized by the loss of this cat. It was her beloved companion. And I was sympathetic. I love animals, as you can see. Um, and I was very sympathetic. And as we spoke further, I found out that the cat died 10 years ago.
Wow.
She can't see a cat without being triggered back into the trauma of that loss, right? So her neuroception, this sort of, it's an unconscious, she's not thinking about it. She's not like, oh, I see a cat. My cat died. Now I'm in stress mode. It happened so outside of her realm of consciousness. And it just is that whole thing was keeping her really stuck. Right. And so talking about it reminded her even more of it. Right. So it wasn't that I think people's stories are very, very important. But when I work with people, I really try, I say, you're going to tell your story to me once, and then we're working on the physiology. Because in the polyvagal theory, trauma is actually physiological, it's not psychological. And so we really have to address the physiology of stress and trauma in order to get out of the sympathetic dominance and into a parasympathetic state. And when we're in parasympathetic state, inflammation goes down, right? And inflammation is, as most doctors will, attest to, is the source of most chronic disease. Um, so if we can get somebody shifting into a state of being that they can respond to the external stimuli as maybe more consciously, less unconsciously, and more in a parasympathetic response system rather than sympathetic reactivity like danger, danger, or I'm just going to faint or freeze because, playing dead is a survival mechanism in nature.
Mhm.
So, yeah. So, what I love is that I just love that thought right there that trauma is physiological, not psychological, because that's a really key turning point in a lot of people's awareness of like, oh, I do have an entry point for this. I don't have to just keep retelling my story and processing through, right? So the polyvagal theory is really rests on that idea that trauma is stuck in the body in a physiological way. And if I'm not talking, if I'm not over talking, I will explain the physiological shifts.
Please. Yep. We're here to listen
Okay.
to you, Maria, not me. So please fire away.
Okay. So the physiological shifts are really quite interesting. Like our body prepares for danger, right? So our vision can change, right? Your lacrimal glands, your the glands that create tears and saliva, they will stop producing during a time of stress because you have to have clear vision to get away from. I'm going to go back to just saying that you're being chased by the tiger in the woods, right? The proverbial predator in the is chasing you down, and you have to be able to get away. So physiologically, your body's going to prepare for that. You're going to start pouring out cortisol, epinephrine, adrenaline. The adrenal glands get extremely involved, right? And the biochemistry of stress then causes all these physiological changes. Okay, so eyesight changes, um, olfactory, and these are all cranial nerves, the optic, auditory, olfactory, social engagement. We've got nerves through our faces that allow us to socially engage, which is part of survival, right? So, eyesight can change. Smell goes way up, taste goes down because in a threat situation, you need to be able to smell danger, but you don't need to be able, or you don't have to taste things, right? In a chronic situation, that's really annoying, when you don't taste food.
Hmm.
Um, you may have had this where patients will tell you, whatever, I don't really care, food, it's kind of like that's actually a stress response, which I find very interesting.
That is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, the entry point that Dr. Porges is utilizing for the therapy that I utilize in working with clients is through the auditory nerve. So when you're under a threat response, you actually tune into the sounds of threat. So the middle ear muscle shuts down and you tune into the low frequencies and very high frequencies, which of course correlates. If we're talking about the tiger, it's going to correlate to growls and screams, right? Maybe your scream, but it's still a very high frequency. So and that's why, like sirens, our sirens are all very low. You get that, fire truck going by and it's like really low, and then it goes into the high pitch. And what does that do? You're instantly alerted, danger. I've got to pull over and get out of the way. There's something going on. So our systems actually know this, and they tune into that. So over chronic stress your ear stays in that state, right? And so you are tuned into these high and low frequencies, which can be very annoying, right? After a while, it wears you out. It's just like, I have so many people that say, I used to love to listen to music. I can't tolerate it anymore. When I get in my car, I just want silence. I don't want to hear people talking at me. Oh, their voices are annoying. I don't want to go out to restaurants because the sounds and the music playing, and then I hear every conversation at every table because they're not able to like filter anything out. It's all coming in, and it can be very overwhelming, overstimulating, puts you in the sympathetic mode. So, of course, you're not going to be digesting your food. So, people say it doesn't feel good to eat, it just sits in my stomach. It's like a big lump and I go home and I'm sad, so it is an entry point that we can use to start the re-regulation process. And I think it's brilliant that Dr. Porges figured that out.
He's a very smart cookie, to say the least. Um,
He's pretty fun.
Um,
Yeah.
and just for folks listening, because some folks might already be familiar with the SSP and how, like, the Safe and Sound protocol and how it incorporates listening to music. But would you be able to tie in to folks who aren't familiar with it? Like, so how does that middle ear actually act as like you've explained how it acts as a window, but what's actually involved with the Safe and Sound protocol process? If you don't mind explaining that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people have said to me, if they're one thing about being chronically stressed is you become a really awesome skeptic, right? Because it's like I've tried everything and nothing works, right? I hear that a lot too. The this is, so people will say to me, "Are you like subliminally changing my brain, Maria? Like, what are you guys doing here? Is it binaural beats?" It's actually none of that. It's it's much simpler. It's like it's crazy simple. It's modulated frequencies. So you're listening to, it's a listening protocol, super pleasant. It's a very easy protocol to engage with, but it's powerful. And that's the thing is people think, oh, I'm just listening to this music, but it's actually very, very powerful. It's having a profound effect on the physiology of stress in your body. So what it's doing is the sound that the app, it's all done through an app. You can do it remotely. It's super easy to do. People can do it in their homes now. When Dr. Porges was first working with patients and clients, it had to be done in a clinic. But now it's delivered through an app. You have to use a smart device, and a lot of people don't like that, but you can, put it on and put the device away from you. And I always talk to people about strategies around how to do the therapy. So that's part of the whole orientation process. But what this is modulated frequencies they've been scientifically set up in different types of music. So when I first started doing this therapy, there was only one option, and it was like this sort of 70s folk music with lyrics. And a lot of people didn't like it. They were just like, I can't listen to the lyrics. It's making me, you know, it's bothering me. So they have now developed so many options. There's classical music, there's like sort of, I would call it sort of new age music, the type of music you would listen to if you were getting a massage, you know. There's different forms of instrumental music. So I believe at this point there's something for everybody. It's much more deliverable at this point in time. It's progressive. So you start, there's 5 hours to a core program that does most of the heavy lifting, shift work on the nervous system, but it's progressive. So you move through it sequentially, a half an hour a day, listening to it with headphones on, not earbuds, but like full headphones, uh, not noise canceling. They can be as rudimentary as possible. The ones I recommend are like $49. So it's not an expensive protocol to engage with. And you sit comfortably and you listen and you move through a half an hour a day. So it takes 10 days to do the core program. And the way I explain it to people so they have a bit of a visual is that it's kind of like building a muscle. And because we're working with the middle ear muscle, we're actually strengthening it. And what do you do when you lift weights? You contract and you relax, and you contract and relax, and you build that muscle. It's very similar. We're building back the middle ear muscle so that it is functioning, and amazing things take place. It's just incredible the things that I see with people. Um, Changes in how they taste food. I hear people that they'll call me and they'll say, "You can't believe, Maria, what's going on for me. I was eating my food and it was like fireworks went off in my head. It was like it was so delicious, and I haven't tasted food like that. And is that my nervous system?" It's hard to believe that you could actually increase an enjoyment like that by regulating your nervous system.
Mhm.
Another thing is like multiple chemical sensitivity. A lot of people can't walk down the soap aisle at the grocery store, or somebody's perfume just knocks them off their balance. Well, the olfactory glands for your nose stops being as sensitive. So you start to have a higher level of tolerance. Your neuroceptors calm down. It's no longer dangerous, right? So that's a beautiful thing. They're like, God, I feel so much safer in the world. I can move through the grocery store without being afraid. Or, my that colleague at work that always wears too much perfume and it was making me crazy. It doesn't bother me as much anymore, you know? So those are some really beautiful benefits to regulating those physiological shifts that occur when we're under stress. So,
What are and those are great changes. Absolutely. What are some of the other changes? Like, if memory serves, when I did the SSP certification course, I think they had published sort of like an informal, like kind of survey based study that was kind of collecting information from folks who had been using, like clinicians who had been using the SSP for quite some time, and they were, I think, saying like, significant number of folks would report improvements with like energy levels, reduced pain, fewer
oh
headaches,
yeah.
less anxiety, better sleep. So could you speak to some of the other effects that you've seen with folks doing the SSP?
Absolutely. And all of those things, those are all really great benefits. Obviously, better sleep, more restful sleep, where you can get into those deeper realms and really wake up feeling refreshed. I mean, that right there is worth more than, I mean, most people say to me that they're just so tired of not being able to sleep well, right? Constipation, elimination is a really big piece of how the vagus nerve is innervating the systems. So, helping people, relieve constipation or chronic diarrhea, right? And so that can also be alleviated through the work that we're doing here. Um, Improved digestion. That absolutely just one of the top things on my list is improved digestion because when you can digest the food correctly, you're going to be nourished, right? And that nourishment, the beautiful thing about the human body is it's a system, right? So if you improve one system, you're going to have an effect on like 10 others, which is really a fabulous thing because if you improve your nutrient density by being able to absorb and interact better with your food, you're actually healing the sort of physiological insults to the vagus nerve, right? The vagus nerve is a nerve, it's got a myelin sheath. And if it doesn't get the, proper nutrients like B1 or omega 3s, and we're living a stressful lifestyle and eating a lot of junk food and we're bringing in, then that system is actually going to work against the vagus nerve being healthy and responsive. So it all functions together. And I think that's the most fascinating thing that I learned is just by working with clients in our clinic is that when Dr. Nye always likes to say a rising tide floats all boats. And I think that's such a great way to look at it, right? If we can get one system up and a patient of his can start feeling the benefit of that system improvement, then I think that's like a home run because then we can get that person to keep moving along that path towards regulation. So, yes. Other improvements, heart rate variability. The vagus nerve is intricately tied to your heart rate variability. And so it actually has a little piece that loops right through the aortic arch of the heart, which I find fascinating. It loops through the larynx, right? So it's just like giving information all the time. What is really great about this therapy, too, is that another entry point that you can use that doesn't cost you anything except a little bit of time is breathing correctly. So we can shift heart rate variability by accessing the vagus nerve through our breath. And I stress this really strongly with everybody I work with that to get the most to optimize this therapy, breath work is essential. Like engaging in breath work. And we've heard this forever, right? Breathe. I mean, Lamaze has used breathing. Every yogi out there uses breathing. The esoteric teachings are all return to the breath, right? The breath is so powerful. And it is the only autonomic nervous system activity that we have conscious control over. All the rest of it is done, without our help. But the breath is something that we actually have conscious control over. So when you're stressed out, the very best thing that you can do is breathe. You're going to give so much information to the vagus nerve just through breath because you're changing your biochemistry, you're reducing the oxygen, um, or actually you're utilizing your oxygen better, I should put it that way. So breathing techniques, and there's lots of different ones. I try to keep it very simple when I'm working with people. It's just to pay attention to how you're breathing. Um, Most people become, when you're stressed out, it's really easy to become a shabby breather or like a holding your breath. You can hold your breath and not even know you're doing it, right? And then you have to go, people like take these big giant sort of restorative gulps of air, right? But that is giving the sympathetic nervous system the idea that you're in danger, right? So the best way to breathe is through the nose, in and out through the nose. Keep the mouth closed because when you're breathing through your mouth, that is an indication that you're in trouble, right? It's like, I got to get a lot of air in. So, I mean, it's kind of like doctors have known this forever. They make people breathe into a paper bag, if you're going into shock, because they're trying to slow down that fast, hyperventilation. So, breathing in and out through the nose, lengthening the exhale. The more you can give length to the exhale. So, you breathe into the belly and you breathe in maybe to the count of 4 and you exhale to the count of 8, all in and out through the nose. And it's remarkable what that does, just that very thing physiologically to the body. And I tell people, especially if they're having digestive issues, breathe before you eat. Take about, I don't know, a minute or two to just sit down and just breathe into your belly, slow it down, maybe a little gratitude for the food that's in front of you. Make sure that you're not eating while you're driving. You're not, stressed out. You're not stress eating. You hear that a lot. I'm so stressed out. I'm eating anything that's in sight. Probably the worst thing you can do for yourself, you know? So just taking that slow pause, take a breath, close your eyes, little gratitude. Um, Hopefully you have somebody to eat with. That's always delightful. But if you don't, you know, uh, putting some calm music on, something that feels good, remembering, thinking of good thoughts, thinking of times when you're laughing with people, so good for your digestion. All of those things are really important so that you can interact the way that you need to with food so you can, bring those nutrients in. So yeah, so that's those are a lot of now I've used it with people that have had things like high blood pressure, sort of like POTS, if you have any kind of heart arrhythmia, and I'm not saying in any way that this is a substitute for any kind of work you're doing with a cardiologist, not at all. In fact, I was listening to a cardiologist talking, brilliant cardiologist talking about he uses the vagus nerve to help his patients, and it's not a substitute for interventions that absolutely have to be done. This is not, medical advice. He incorporates it in to optimize outcomes, right? And he talks about how beautifully people respond and that at the end of the day, they have a stronger health profile from, just bringing in regulation techniques that can calm their body down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. And as you said, it doesn't cost a thing. Take a little bit of time, but not much time. It's quite simple. Um, And just some of the things you said, Maria, reminded me just to remind everyone listening that, as per usual, nothing said on these podcasts should be construed as medical advice. This is all for informational purposes only. If you need healthcare advice, medical advice, please talk to your healthcare provider to get that advice. I'm just curious, Maria, like it sounds like you've certainly had some folks you've worked with where even within, say, that first 10 days of them, using the Safe and Sound protocol, that they're noticing benefits, which is awesome. When I did my training, I seem to recall them saying that there could be, continued benefits or like additional benefits, rather. So during the listening, but then also for, say, the subsequent 6 weeks after finishing the SSP. So just maybe a multi-part question here, but I'm just wondering, with your extensive experience with this method, how often do folks see improvements after their first round of SSP? How often do they need to do multiple rounds? What's the average number of rounds that folks need to do? And then are you typically seeing kind of like, a gradual improvement like over the ensuing 6 weeks? Or is it like we see benefits during, say, the 10 days and then it's all just that kind of sustains over the 6 weeks? Maybe they do another round and don't see benefit till they start listening to music again. So what's the trajectory and timeline like for folks?
Yeah, excellent question. This is a big one that I get a lot when I start working with people. So the first thing to remember is that everybody is different and everybody responds differently. People do the therapy differently, right? There are some people that are so neurologically activated that they have to listen less than a half an hour. I have some people that are so shut down, they get to the end of the half hour and they're like, I don't know. I didn't really feel anything. So it's one of those things that is it's hard to address it specifically. I can't say, oh, these are my average, but I would say that in general, most people, they listen for 20 days. You have a 20-day protocol, right? Some people feel shifts immediately. They're just like, wow, this is incredible. I just feel different. I feel calmer. Um, some people, it takes a few rounds before they get to that. And a round is 20 days. Okay. In my
And,
vernacular.
and sorry, Maria, just to clarify, because I thought earlier you said they were listening for half an hour a day for 10 days. So could you just speak to that
Yeah,
20 days?
absolutely. I skipped over something. There's two programs that you start with. There's a core program that does the major shifting. Yeah, it's the most heavily modulated. And then there's a program called the balance program. And the balance program is more lightly modulated and it stabilizes the shifts that have occurred. And it's interesting because I have some people they're like, I listened as hard as I could, Maria, and I didn't hear any difference between this or that, right? And it's like, you're not going to. There's no way that you are going to be able to detect these modulation frequencies. Your middle ear is absolutely, and it is profound. So don't overthink it, because it's not anything that really needs to be figured out. You're just engaging in a therapeutic exercise, really. Is a good way to look at it. So some people listen much longer, and some people listen for shorter periods, and it's all okay. There's no really perfect way. There's a perfect way for you, right? And so we work on that. I help people to figure out how it's going to be, optimized for them. And also we got to take into account lifestyle. Like, when can you do it? Can you do it in the morning? Do you have to do it in the afternoon? Don't do it before bedtime. I always just say don't do it before bedtime. It can activate your nervous system, and then, it could disrupt sleep. I don't see that very often, but it's potential. So why go there? So we work to figure out how it's going to fit into the lifestyle. It's not meditative. You're going to do it sitting up, fully alert. I ask people to engage in something that is going to be more right brain, more creative, to sort of get that right brain flow going. And I talk a lot about right and left brain activity, and what happens under stress. And so we really want to reactivate right brain activity. So it's not meditative. You're not going to just lay in bed, put the headphones on and chill out, you know. Although, that sounds kind of nice too, but that's not what we're doing here. So you engage in it for 20 days. It's a half an hour a day, 10 days on the core, 10 days on the balance. And you do it just right, just sequentially. You just do the balance program right after you finish the core. Okay. And then very often I'll see people have shifts afterward. I always have a follow-up with people after their first 20 days, and we go over what they feel. And some people will say, it was really nice. I like it, but I didn't really feel anything. And then I hear from them like 3 weeks later, and they're like, oh my gosh, I have to tell you what happened for me. And I love it when people connect with me that way. And they say, unbelievable what, I got in this situation and I responded this way. And normally I would have responded that way. And everything came out fantastic. And I'm so happy. And so sometimes we can expect the shifts to occur not during the protocol. So it does have a lingering working effect on you. And so generally in my practice, so when I first started doing this therapy, it was sort of considered a one and done. A lot of the people that were using this therapy most were psychologists, and they were using it in offices, and they would have someone come in and do the, I've had a lot of people say to me, oh yeah, I did Safe and Sound like 5 years ago. And they'll be a little bit dismissive. And I think that through this network of practitioners that are using it now really effectively in clinics, and outside of just psychology, like I'm using it for gut health. And it's like my foundational therapy for people before they do anything else. I put them on diets, but they have to do Safe and Sound protocol in order to get that obstacle out of the way, right? It's amazing how different people respond to the therapeutic diets, if the nervous system isn't working against them, right? So, I, when they first started using this, it was sort of a one and done. It was kind of expensive. People are like, I tried that, it didn't work. Now they give you, when you sign up, it's a license for a full year. So my expectation on people is that they use it for a year, and I get the best results that way. So they'll do, and this is the way I do it. It's not the way everyone does it. And a lot of clients of mine, because I have a dashboard, so I can kind of peek in and see what you're up to. Um, I, I'm, only to be helpful, not to be judgy. But I'll see that they may go for 6 months without utilizing it. And that's to me a little bit tragic, because you have this beautiful therapy and it's just there to help, right? It's like having a gym membership and then not going, right? And you go, why am I not going to the gym? It's the exact same thing. So if you have the therapy, use it. And the way I do it is I have people do the 20 days, and then I have them take a month off I call it self-regulation. That's the time that we're going to let your system sort of process, right? And some people, it'll be longer. It might be 6 weeks. I have an airline pilot who he's used it every day for 3 years now. And he says, I won't stop doing it. I'm like, well, don't you want to self-regulate? And he goes, no, I love this. It keeps it. And I'm like, okay, you're an airline pilot. So I'm going to trust that you know what you're doing. And I hope my airline pilot's doing Safe and Sound.
Yeah, that'd be better. It's got to be better.
Yeah, it's probably, he's like a Sully, right?
Mhm.
So anyway, what I'm trying to convey with a lot of words is that there's no set way of doing it. I have recommendations and I follow up with people, but some people do it more often, some people do it less often. One thing I do want to say, that what I really like about this therapy is that I see it as a tool in your health toolkit, right? This is a therapy. For instance, I'm going to give you a personal story. I was visiting Austin last May, and I love to go on long bicycle rides. I'm a long distance cyclist. And I'm in Austin, busy city. It's very hot, very humid, already kind of stressful. I'm getting out of town. And so we're riding through Austin and we come to this giant intersection. There was like five entrants to this intersection. And it was my turn to go. And I went, but this person in a very large truck came in to turn right in front of me, and instead of stopping because it was my right of way, he just blared on the horn, screaming out his window, flipping me off. I mean, it was really dysregulating. I was startled. I was frightened. First of all, it was a huge threat to my system, and the noise and the yelling and all the people around looking at me, it was embarrassing. I felt my entire insides just go to jello. And I was shaky. I got out of the intersection. I got out of the way. Tears, my system just went into full shock mode, right? So I sat on the side of the road and I did a bunch of breath work. But for the rest of the vacation, it was like 3 days longer. I couldn't eat. I was having a hard time falling asleep. I just had this anxiety that was stuck in me. And even as a practitioner, it took me until the plane ride home to go, oh my gosh, my nervous system just took a massive hit, right? And because you kind of think, oh, I'm able to handle all this stuff. But my neuroception was completely everything. Then I'm at the airport. If there was a noise, I was like jumping, I felt really dysregulated. So on the plane ride home, the flight home, we had some turbulence and I got a little startled. And then I was like, oh my gosh. As soon as I got home, I did my safe and sound again, got myself back into regulation. And I use that story a lot with clients because it's a tool for you now. It's not, you can use it to become regulated. And then you have it in your toolkit for those times you get a fender bender or you've got, life is never going to stop throwing opportunities at us, to recognize our response systems, right? Greg, the doctor I work with, likes to say, stress isn't the issue. It's our response to stress. That is the real problem because you're never going to get away from stress. And responding to stress is part of survival. So responding correctly and then moving on from it is really the goal, right? It's to not stay in that stress response, but to move past it so that we have a fluid movement between sympathetic and parasympathetic. That's the key to health. And so, yeah, so it becomes this beautiful little, tool that you can re-regulate yourself anytime you need to. And so in my estimation, there's really no end to it. Like I have a lot of people that just re-up their subscriptions every year because they love having that tool available to them, you know,
Yeah.
stressful
Well,
time.
that's really great, Maria. And yeah, it's really well said. I know our time's kind of winding down here, and I just had one more quick question. Because and you alluded to this a little bit, but I just kind of want to ask you straight on. So I know when I was doing my SSP training, they were, talking about how, some folks might get really triggered, like they might start feeling emotional dysregulation during their SSP training sessions, and there are strategies to help mitigate those symptoms that might come up, etc. I know in my experience to date so far, I've really not encountered that a whole lot. I've had a few patients who have had some, um, you know, they haven't been able to do, say, the full session that I prescribe for them. They have to like take a break and do some regulating exercises and whatnot. But it's been really the exception to the rule I found so far. So I'm just wondering, in your practice and your experience, how often is it that someone needs to pause the recording, do some self-regulation, all that good stuff to get through, say, the end of their half an hour session?
Great question, too. I mean, this is another big piece of the therapy that everybody responds differently, right? So what is interesting is that when we become dysregulated and we we normalize dysregulation, it can feel very uncomfortable to move back into regulation. It can almost feel, it feels so unfamiliar that I've had some people feel frightened of it, which is very, I mean, one or two people. That's a very rare circumstance. But if and the person that I'm thinking of was like heavily, heavily traumatized. So feeling safe, I love that Dr. Porges named it Safe and Sound, because what this therapy is sort of a bottom up therapy, right? A lot of regulation work is brain to body. Change your thinking, rewire the brain, create new neuronal connections, all that stuff. That can be really hard for a lot of people if their body doesn't feel safe. So what I love about this therapy is that it really is working on physical safety, like the perception that I'm safe, right? And that's very physical. And that's why I say this is physiology rather than psychology, because we're calming the body down. Once we feel safe, then we can think more clearly, but we can make better choices, decisions, all sleep, all of those good things we've already talked about. But the body has to you have to accept that safety at some point, right? And some people have a harder time with that because it feels very unfamiliar. Their safe place is in defense, right? So some of the things like, have you heard of the Valsalva technique? I think I'm
Yeah.
pronouncing that
Yes.
right.
Yep. Valsalva. Yep.
Yeah, awesome technique for when people are feeling really unsafe, right? So when I've got clients that get to that place where they're like, I feel agitated, because it can trigger where that's why I say this is not a benign therapy. It is very powerful and it can trigger the nervous system into the feeling of anxiety, right? So you're sitting there and you're listening to music, and then you start feeling that my breath is getting shorter. I just feel anxious. I almost feel like I'm going into a panic attack. I have to stop. Now, I love working with children because children are great. They just pull the headphones off and say, I'm done, right? But adults we've been trained to sort of like power through, right? You can do this. And I always recommend don't power through on this. It's not something this is not detox, right? We're actually influencing your nervous system. So go slow. It's okay. If you can only listen for 10 minutes a day, that's okay. But there are instances where you can clear your nervous system, right? You can use Valsalva, which is it's like tightening yourself and bearing down. A lot of practitioners are using a new technique called trauma relief exercise, where you hold a pose, like a chair pose against a wall until you shake. Um, that is a way of discharging the system. You've heard my dog. She's making herself very much a part of this podcast today. So I'm going to use her. When I take her walking, she's a non-aggressive dog. But if she runs into an aggressive dog, when we walk away, she gives a tremendous shake through her body, from her head to her tail. She just shakes her whole body. She's discharging all of that cortisol and adrenaline. Like, she got ready to defend herself. She didn't really want to, but she got ready, and then she had to discharge that energy. So when we don't do that, we kind of carry all that energy. It gets stuck in the nervous system, and then it can come out when we're not even knowing it. Panic. People I wasn't even thinking about anything, and I had a panic attack. It's sort of your system discharging. There's other techniques, of course. I love dance. I love, put some music on and just flail yourself around. What is that saying? Dance like nobody's watching. That's sort of a discharge for the nervous system. I love bouncing on a yoga ball. I'll hold on to the back of a chair and just bounce to music. That's a lovely way. It's clearing the lymph, clears the nervous system. The deep breathing we talked about, a cold shower. It's a great way to sort of knock you out of that. If you're having a panic attack, or if you're listening to the therapy and you feel anxious, you can get up, pause the program, splash your face with some really cold water, you know, move around, shake, come back 5 minutes later, start it again. Most of the time, people can finish out the half hour if they utilize some of those techniques.
Great. Well, thank you so much for all that information, Maria. It was really, really enlightening. And just before we wrap up our chat today, if folks are interested in working with you, or if you have any online offerings or online presence, could you share that info? And I can put everything in the show notes in terms of links and whatnot.
Absolutely. So I'm a certified SSP practitioner, and I'm in the process right now of continuing education with the Polyvagal Institute. So I've got a lot of, and I've been working with this therapy for over 4 years now. So I am so privileged to have a lot of experience working with, people over the years and then studying further with the Porges himself. So I'm really excited about that. I love bringing this therapy to people. My website is very simple. It's mariazilka.com. That's all you have to do is my name. It's Zilka with a Z as Zulu. So it's mariazilka.com. And you can go onto that website. You can request an appointment with me. It's generally a 90-minute orientation, but I do offer a, 15 to 30-minute complimentary consult to explain how it would be beneficial for, individual situations. So, yeah. So I also work with people for nutritional therapy. But I like to do the SSP in conjunction with it. So that's sort of my passionate therapy right now.
Awesome. And are you on social media?
I am. You can access those. Instagram and X and Facebook is all connected through my website. So yeah, so I'll be, I'm always right now making some new videos, so I can show people some breath work and some other somatic, like neurological somatic movements that a lot of neurological chiropractors have taught me to re-engage the right hemisphere of the brain. Yeah, so there's lots of information. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much, Maria. Once again, I really appreciate you chatting with me today and really appreciate your time. And thanks for everything that you do.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your patience with my workmate over here.
It was a great team effort. I think she brought a lot to the podcast episode today. So thank you to her as well.
Thank you.
And
Thanks again.
my
All
my
right.
pleasure. And thanks, folks, for listening to this or watching this episode of the Overcoming Chronic Illness podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and please stay tuned for the next one.